The morning air hung heavy with dampness as Silas O'Connell guided his 18-wheeler down Route 95, straddling the border between South Carolina and Georgia. Rain had fallen through the night, leaving the pavement slick and the surrounding fields cloaked in a fine mist that seemed to soften the edges of the world. Silas liked these early hours when the highway belonged mostly to professional drivers like himself. At 58, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his weathered scalp, Silas had spent more of his life behind the wheel than anywhere else. His eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning the road ahead. Trained by 32 years of anticipating trouble before it happened 5:15, he muttered to himself, glancing at the dashboard clock, right on schedule. The industrial parts he was hauling needed to be in Tampa by 3 that afternoon, and Silas had never missed a delivery deadline in his career. The radio played softly, a country song about lost love that Silas had heard 1,000 times before. He reached over and changed the station, settling on a news broadcast instead. As he rounded a gentle curve, orange construction barrels appeared, narrowing the highway from 3 lanes to 1. Silas downshifted smoothly, the big rig responding to his touch. He slowed to 40, then 30. The reduced speed made the rain washed, details of the roadside suddenly more visible. That's when he heard it, so faint he thought he might have imagined it, a sound that didn't belong to the symphony of his truck. The rain-slicked tires on wet asphalt, the deep rumble of the diesel engine, the occasional splash through a puddle. This was something else. A high-pitched, barely audible cry. Silas frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together as he scanned the roadside more carefully. The construction zone stretched ahead, the morning light still too dim to illuminate much.
Beyond what his headlights call a seamless, particularly deep rut in the shoulder, something reflected his light, smacked him to small, terrified eye. Not in the world, Silas, his foot instinctively easing off the accelerator.
There, huddled against a drainage ditch, was a small cat. Even from the height of his cab, Silas could see how painfully thin it was, its fur matted with mud, and who knew what else. The animal didn't run as his massive truck approached. It just stared, those eyes like tiny flashlights in the gloom. Next to the cat lay a crushed cardboard box with a torn piece of packing tape still attached. Silas could make out part of a shipping label, the address smudged and illegible from rain and dirt. "Say someone dumped you," he said aloud, though no one could hear him. His jaw tightened. In all his years on the road, he'd seen plenty of abandoned animals. It was an ugly reality of highway life. Usually, he drove on. What else could he do? He had schedules to keep, and the shelters were already overflowing with unwanted pets. Silas pressed the accelerator again, the truck responding with its familiar surge of power. The construction zone ended, and he shifted gears, picking up speed. But those eyes, something about them, stayed with him, like an echo that wouldn't fade. He'd gone perhaps 50 yards when he felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. Not physical pain, but something deeper. "Damn it all," he growled, and before he could talk himself out of it, he checked his mirrors, signaled, and carefully pulled the massive truck onto the shoulder. For a long moment, he just sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, arguing with himself. "You've got a schedule," he told himself. "You've got responsibilities." But the image of those eyes wouldn't leave him. With a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Silas switched on his hazard lights, grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, and climbed down from the cab. The morning air felt cool against his face as he walked back along the shoulder, the wet gravel crunching beneath his heavy work boots. When he reached the spot where he'd seen the cat, he slowed, not wanting to frighten it further. "Hey there," he called softly, crouching down, despite the protest from his knees. "You okay, little one?" The cat hadn't moved. Silas could see it was even worse off than he'd thought. Female, he realized, and severely malnourished. Her grey and white fur was so dirty, it was hard to distinguish the original pattern. She trembled visibly, whether from cold fear or both. He couldn't tell. "Who'd do this to you?" he murmured, anger flickering through him like heat lightning. He reached toward her slowly, expecting her to bolt or perhaps even scratch. Instead, she remained frozen, as if resigned to whatever new misery might befall her. Only her eyes moved, following his hand with a wariness that spoke of past cruelties. When he touched her, gently running a calloused finger over her head, she flinched but didn't retreat. He noticed something else then, marks around her neck, as if from a collar worn too tight for too long, and when she shifted slightly, he glimpsed old scars on her belly, the fur never having grown back properly. "Jesus," Silas whispered. He hadn't planned what to do next. In 32 years of driving, he'd never once picked up a hitchhiker, human or animal. His life ran on schedules and routines. Detours weren't part of the program. But as he looked at this small, broken creature, something shifted inside him, like a gear that had been stuck for years, suddenly turning again, with a gentleness that would have surprised those who knew him only as the gruff veteran driver who kept to himself. Silas scooped up the cat. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bones and matted fur that he could have held in one hand. She didn't struggle, didn't try to escape. She simply surrendered, as if too exhausted to fight anymore. And that, more than anything, broke something open inside Silas O'Connell. He carried her back to his truck, cradling her against his chest to share his warmth. Inside the cab, he placed her on the passenger seat atop an old hand towel he kept for wiping down the dashboard. Then he turned the heater up high. "Just hang on," he told her, reaching out to stroke her head once more. "Oh, we'll figure this out." As he pulled back onto the highway, Silas glanced at his watch. He was already 15 minutes behind schedule, and the detour he was contemplating would cost him at least another hour, probably more. In 3 decades of driving, he'd never voluntarily missed a deadline, never put anything ahead of the job. What was he thinking? But then the cat made a sound, not quite a meow, more like a sigh, and curled into a tighter ball on the towel. Silas picked up his phone and pulled up the GPS app. "Find veterinarian," he said clearly. "Nearest location." As the app calculated, Silas looked over at his unexpected passenger and made a decision that would change everything. "Delivery's going to be late today," he told her. "Some things are more important." What Silas didn't know, couldn't know, was that this small deviation from his carefully planned route would lead him down a path he never expected, one that would heal wounds he'd carried for far too long. As the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the highway ahead, Silas O'Connell drove away from the familiar and towards something new, with a trembling cat as his unlikely guide. What was it about those eyes that had made him stop? He couldn't say, but for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, something he thought had died long ago, along with so many other parts of himself. And as Route 95 stretched before him like a promise, Silas wondered what other surprises might be waiting just around the bend. Exits later, Silas pulled his truck into the parking lot of the Riverdale Animal Hospital. It wasn't easy finding a spot large enough for his 18-wheeler, but he managed to take up several spaces at the far end of the lot. As he cut the engine, he glanced over at his passenger. The cat hadn't moved much during the drive except to press herself against the warm air vent. Her eyes remained half closed, her breathing shallow but steady. Silas reached over and gently touched her side, feeling the rapid rise and fall of her ribcage. "So I almost there," he promised, though he wasn't sure she understood. "Let's get you some help." Carefully, he wrapped the towel around her frail body and lifted her. This time she let out a small, plaintive meow that twisted something in Silas's chest. He tucked her securely against him and climbed down from the cab, taking extra care not to jostle her. The animal hospital was just opening for the day. Young woman behind the reception desk looked up in surprise as Silas entered, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. He must have made quite a sight, a large grizzled trucker cradling a tiny bundle against his chest, work boots leaving. damp marks on the clean linoleum floor. "Good morning," she said, recovering quickly. "How can we help you today?" "Found this cat by the roadside," Silas replied, his voice gruffer than he intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Tiashi's in bad shape. Looks abandoned." The receptionist, her name tag read Amber, stood up and came around the desk. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the bundle in his arms. Silas nodded and carefully opened the towel. The cat blinked in the bright fluorescent light, her eyes struggling to adjust after the dimness of the truck cab. Amber's expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured. She looked up at Silas. "You were right to bring her in. She's severely undernourished, and I think she might have an upper respiratory infection." She gently stroked the cat's head with one finger. "What's her name?" The question caught Silas off guard. "Don't know," he admitted. "Just found her maybe 40 minutes ago." Amber studied the cat for a moment longer, then smiled. "She has such delicate features despite everything she's been through, like a little Mirelle." "Mirelle?" Silas repeated, the unfamiliar name feeling strange on his tongue. "It means to wonder or to admire in French," Amber explained. "She's a wonder, this one surviving whatever she's been through." Silas looked down at the cat. Mirelle. It seemed like too fancy a name for such a bedraggled creature, but something about it fit nonetheless, a small bit of elegance for a cat who'd known too much hardship. Amber carefully carried Mirelle into an examination room, Silas following close behind. The room was small and bright, with a stainless steel table in the center and shelves, lined with bottles and medical equipment. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweet, like the powdered milk Silas remembered from his childhood. He watched as Amber gently placed Mirelle on the table, her movements practiced and soothing. The cat remained still, only her eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar surroundings. "I'm going to take her temperature and check her vitals," Amber explained, her voice soft and reassuring. "It won't hurt, I promise." She spoke to Mirelle as she worked, her words a constant stream of comfort. Silas stood back, feeling strangely out of place in this sterile environment. He was used to the rough and tumble world of trucking, the smell of diesel and the feel of the road beneath his wheels. This was different, delicate. He watched Amber's hands, so gentle as she palpated Mirelle's small body, her brow furrowed in concentration. "She's definitely underweight," Amber said after a few minutes, glancing up at Silas. "And her temperature is a little elevated. I'm also hearing some congestion in her chest, which points to a respiratory infection." She paused, her gaze meeting Silas's. "We'll need to run some tests to get a full picture. Blood work, fecal exam, maybe an X-ray. But she's stable for now." "Do what you need to do," Silas said gruffly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Just make her better." Amber smiled, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "We will. She's in good hands now." She turned back to Mirelle, stroking her head. "You're going to be okay, sweet girl." The tests took longer than Silas expected. He waited. In the small waiting room, the only other occupant, a woman with a nervous-looking chihuahua in a carrier, he tried to focus on an old magazine about trucking, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Mirelle. He wondered about her past, about the people who had so carelessly discarded her. What kind of heartless soul could do that? The thought made his jaw tighten. He wasn't a sentimental man, but there was something about that cat, something that had gotten under his skin. Finally, Amber emerged from the back, a clipboard in her hand. "Okay, Silas," she said, using his name for the first time. "We have the results. Mirelle has a moderate upper respiratory infection, which is treatable with antibiotics. She's also dehydrated and malnourished, but her blood work didn't show any major organ problems. The fecal exam was negative for parasites, which is good. We'll need to keep her here for a few hours to get her started on fluids and medication, and then we can discuss a long-term plan." Silas nodded, relieved that the news wasn't worse. "What about those scars on her belly?" Amber's expression turned somber. Those appear to be from a previous space surgery, but it was done poorly. There's some scar tissue and adhesions that could cause her discomfort down the line. She sighed. It's hard to say for sure without further testing, but it's possible. She might need another surgery eventually. Silas frowned. Another surgery? How much is all this going to cost? He wasn't a wealthy man. His savings were modest, and he'd been planning to put them towards a new set of tires for his rig, but he hadn't even considered the expense until now. Amber hesitated, then named a figure that made Silas's eyes widen. It was more than he'd expected, more than he could comfortably afford. He looked at Morel, who was now curled up in a small crate on the counter, her breathing slightly easier. He thought of her lying helpless by the roadside, abandoned and alone. "All right," he said finally, his voice rough. "Do it. I'll figure out the money somehow." Amber smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, Silas. You're doing a wonderful thing for her." She paused. "Are you going to keep her?" The question hung in the air. Silas hadn't considered that far ahead. He was a long-haul trucker, for God's sake. His life was on the road. He barely had time for himself, let alone a pet. But then he looked at Morel again, at the way she seemed to shrink into herself, and he knew the answer before he even spoke. "Yeah," he said, a strange certainty in his voice. "Yeah, I guess I am." Amber's smile widened. "I'm so glad. She's lucky to have found you." She handed him a clipboard with some paperwork. "While we get her settled, you can fill out these forms. We'll need your contact information and some basic details." Silas took the clipboard and found a seat in the waiting room. As he filled out the forms, he realized he didn't even have a cat carrier, or food, or a litter box. He'd been so focused on getting Morel help that he hadn't thought about the practicalities of owning a pet. He glanced at his watch. He was already hours behind schedule, and he still had a delivery to make in Tampa. He picked up his phone and called his dispatcher, a gruff woman named Brenda, who had known him for years. "Brenda, it's Silas," he said, bracing himself for her reaction. "I'm going to be late. Had a little situation." Brenda's voice crackled through the phone. "Late? Silas O'Connell, you've never been late in your life. What's going on?" Silas hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I found a cat," he said finally, "by the side of the road. She was in bad shape, and I took her to the vet." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Silas could almost hear Brenda's brain processing this information. "You found a cat?" she repeated slowly. "And you're late because of it?" "Yeah," Silas admitted. "She needed help." Brenda sighed, a sound of exasperation and something else, something that almost sounded like grudging respect. "All right, Silas," she said. "I'll reschedule your delivery for tomorrow morning, but you owe me big time for this." "Thanks, Brenda," Silas said, relief flooding through him. "I appreciate it." "Don't mention it," Brenda grumbled. "Just don't make a habit of this, O'Connell. I'm not running a charity here." Silas chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it, Brenda. See you tomorrow." He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, a sense of calm settling over him. He had no idea what he was doing, no idea how he was going to make this work. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing the right thing. A few hours later, Amber called him back into the examination room. Morel was curled up in a small carrier, her eyes bright and alert. She looked much better than she had that morning, her fur slightly cleaner, her breathing more regular. "She's doing well," Amber said, smiling. "She's responded to the fluids and antibiotics, and she's even eaten a little bit of food." She handed Silas a bag of medication and a list of instructions. "She'll need to continue the antibiotics for the next week, and she'll need a special diet for a while to help her gain weight. We'll also need to schedule a follow-up appointment to check on her progress." Silas nodded, taking the bag and the instructions. "I understand. I'll take good care of her." He looked down at Morel, who was watching him with those big, amber eyes. He reached into the carrier and gently stroked her head. "Ready to go home, Mirelle?" he murmured. Mirelle blinked slowly, then let out a soft purr. It was the first time Silas had heard her make any kind of noise, and the sound resonated deep within him. He carefully picked up the carrier and thanked Amber again. "You're a good woman, Amber," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Thank you for everything." Amber smiled. "You're welcome, Silas. And you're a good man. Don't forget to call if you have any questions or concerns." Silas nodded and walked out of the animal hospital, Mirelle's carrier swinging gently in his hand. As he loaded the carrier into the cab of his truck, he realized he had no idea where he was going to put her. His cab was cramped and cluttered, not exactly designed for feline passengers. He glanced around the cab, his gaze landing on the passenger seat. "That'll have to do for now," he decided. He carefully secured the carrier on the seat, making sure it wouldn't slide around while he was driving. Then he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he looked over at Mirelle. She was curled up in her carrier, her eyes closed, but she seemed calm and content. Silas felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. He was hours behind schedule. He had no idea how he was going to pay for Mirelle's medical bills, and his truck cab was about to become a mobile cat condo. But none of that mattered. He had Mirelle, and that was all that counted. The drive to Tampa was long and uneventful. Silas kept the radio low and the temperature comfortable for Mirelle. He checked on her frequently, offering her water and small bits of food. She ate sparingly, but seemed to be gaining strength with each passing hour. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the highway, Silas started to think about where they would spend the night. He usually slept in his cab at truck stops, but that wasn't exactly ideal with a cat in tow. He pulled out his phone and searched for pet-friendly hotels in Tampa. There were a few options, but they were all more expensive than he preferred. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. This whole cat thing was turning out to be more complicated than he'd anticipated. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from Brenda. "Silas," it read, "change of plans. Delivery delayed until tomorrow afternoon. Stay safe." Silas stared at the message in disbelief. Delayed again. He couldn't believe his luck. It was as if the universe was conspiring to make him spend more time with this cat. He chuckled, shaking his head. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe he was supposed to take things slow, to adjust to this new reality of having a companion. He decided to find a truck stop for the night and figure out the hotel situation. In the morning, he pulled into a large truck stop just outside of Tampa, found a parking spot away from the noise and the crowds, and shut off the engine. The air was warm and humid, filled with the rumble of idling trucks and the chatter of other drivers. Silas climbed down from the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Mirelle's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "Let's find us some dinner and a place to sleep." He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Mirelle's carrier on the seat beside him. The waitress, a friendly woman with bright pink hair, came over to take his order. "Just coffee for me," Silas said, "and maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend." He gestured to the carrier. The waitress raised an eyebrow. "A cat?" she asked, surprised. "Yeah," Silas admitted. "Found her by the roadside this morning. She's been through a lot." The waitress's expression softened. "Poor thing. I'll bring the milk right away." She returned a few minutes later with a small bowl of milk and a saucer of water. Silas carefully opened the carrier and placed the bowls inside. Mirelle sniffed at the milk, then lapped it up eagerly. Silas watched her, a sense of satisfaction filling him. It was a small thing, but it felt good to provide for her, to give her something she needed. As he sipped his coffee, He thought about the changes that had happened in his life in the past 24 hours. He'd never considered himself a cat person, but here he was, buying milk for a stray in a truck stop diner. Life had a funny way of surprising you, he mused. Just when you thought you had everything figured out, something unexpected came along and turned your world upside down. And sometimes, those unexpected things turned out to be the best things of all. After dinner, Silas bought a small litter, box and some cat food from the convenience store. He found a quiet corner of the parking lot and set up a makeshift litter area in the back of his cab. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do for now. He settled in for the night, Morel curled, up in her carrier beside him. The rumble of the idling trucks outside was a constant presence, but it didn't bother Silas. He was used to the noise, and it almost felt comforting in a strange way. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought about his upcoming delivery in Tampa. He would have to find a way to make up for the lost time, to prove to Brenda that he was still a reliable driver. But for now, he was content to just be still, to enjoy the quiet companionship of the small cat who had unexpectedly entered his life. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't trade this moment for anything in the world. He had Morel, and that was enough. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the humidity of the previous day having dissipated with the rising sun. Silas woke early, the first rays of light filtering through the cab windows and casting long shadows across the interior. Morel stirred in her carrier, stretching and yawning as if she'd had the most restful sleep of her life. Silas smiled, watching her. It was amazing how much energy she seemed to have regained in just a few short hours. He wondered again about her past, about the life she'd had before he found her by the roadside. Had she been loved? Had she had a home? Or had she always been astray, fending for herself in a harsh and unforgiving world? He pushed the thoughts away. It didn't matter now. She was with him, and he would take care of her. He climbed out of the cab and stretched, his muscles, protesting after a night spent in the cramped space. He made a quick breakfast of coffee and a granola bar, then set about preparing for the day's drive. He cleaned out Morel's litter box, refilled her food and water bowls, and made sure her carrier was securely fastened to the passenger seat. He even found an old blanket in his duffel bag and folded it into a soft bed for her inside the carrier. He wanted her to be as comfortable as possible during the long hours on the road. As he was finishing up, he received another text message from Brenda. Silas, it read. Delivery time changed again. Now 6 p.m. Customer wants it delivered directly to their warehouse on the outskirts of Tampa. Address attached. Silas sighed. This was getting ridiculous. He was now almost a full day behind schedule, and he was starting to worry about the consequences. Brenda was a reasonable woman, but even she had her limits. He couldn't afford to lose this job. It was the only thing that kept him afloat, the only thing that gave his life any semblance of structure and purpose. He glanced at Morel, who was watching him with those big, amber eyes. He felt a pang of guilt. He'd taken on this responsibility, this little life, and now it was interfering with his work. Was he being selfish? Was he putting his own needs ahead of hers? He shook his head, pushing the doubts aside. He'd made a commitment to Morel, and he wasn't going to back down now. He would find a way to make it work, to balance his responsibilities to her with his responsibilities to his job. He sent a quick text message back to Brenda, confirming the new delivery time and address. Then he climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the truck stop, heading towards Tampa. The drive was long and monotonous, the endless stretch of highway blurring into a hypnotic rhythm. Silas kept the radio low, his thoughts drifting. He thought about his past, about the years he'd spent on the road, alone and isolated. He'd always been a loner, a man who preferred the company of his own thoughts to the company of other people. He'd built walls around himself, thick and impenetrable, to protect himself from the pain and disappointment that life had thrown his way. But Morel had somehow managed to breach those walls. Her vulnerability, her resilience, her quiet companionship had chipped away at the armor he'd worn for so long. He was starting to feel things again, emotions he'd thought he'd buried deep within himself. He felt a sense of responsibility, a desire to care for and protect this small creature who had come into his life so unexpectedly. He felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, he could find some meaning and purpose beyond the whole endless miles of highway. As the afternoon wore on, the traffic began to thicken. Tampa was a bustling city, and the roads leading into it were always congested. Silas navigated the traffic with practiced ease, his eyes constantly scanning the road ahead, anticipating every move of the other drivers. He glanced over at Morel, who was curled up in her carrier, seemingly unfazed by the chaos outside. He wondered what she was thinking, what she saw when she looked out the window. Did she see the same things he did? The endless stream of cars, the towering buildings, the frenetic energy of the city? Or did she see something else, something he was missing? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the outskirts of Tampa. He followed the GPS directions to the warehouse, a sprawling industrial complex on the edge of the city. He pulled into the loading dock, feeling a sense of relief that the journey was finally over. He parked the truck, secured the brakes, and climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He walked around to the back of the trailer and opened the doors, ready to unload his cargo. A young man in a forklift approached him, clipboard in hand. "You're the driver from O'Connell Trucking?" he asked, his voice brisk and efficient. "Yeah," Silas replied. "That's me." The young man checked his clipboard. "All right, let's get this unloaded. We're on a tight schedule." Silas nodded and began to unload the cargo, the young man helping him with the forklift. It was a tedious and physically demanding job, but Silas was used to it. He'd spent years loading and unloading trucks, his body hardened by the repetitive motions. As they worked, the young man struck up a conversation. "So, you're a long-haul driver, huh?" he asked. "Yeah," Silas replied. "Been doing it for over 30 years. The young man whistled. "That's a long time. Must be tough being away from home so much." Silas shrugged. "It's what I know. It's my life." The young man nodded. "I guess everyone's got their own path. I'm just starting out here at the warehouse. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." They worked in silence for a few more minutes. Then the young man spoke again. "Hey, I couldn't help but notice. You got a cat in your cab?" Silas hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his personal life with strangers. "Yeah," he admitted. "Found her by the roadside yesterday, taking care of her." The young man's eyes widened. "No kidding? That's cool, man. I've always wanted a cat, but my landlord doesn't allow pets." Silas smiled. "They're good company, quiet mostly." They finished unloading the cargo, and the young man handed Silas a receipt. "All right, that's all set. Thanks for the delivery." "No problem," Silas replied. He climbed back into his cab, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He'd made the delivery, albeit late, and he'd even had a pleasant conversation with a stranger. It was a small victory, but it was enough to lift his spirits. He glanced over at Morel, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "Well, girl," he said, his voice soft. "We did it. We made it." Morel let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas started the engine and pulled out of the loading dock, heading back towards the highway. He had no idea where they would spend the night, but he didn't care. He had Morel, and that was all that mattered. As he drove, he thought about the conversation he'd had with the young man at the warehouse. "Everyone's got their own path," the young man had said. Silas wondered about his own path. Had he chosen it? Or had it chosen him? Had he always been destined to be a loner, a man who found solace in the solitude of the open road? Or was there another path he could have taken, a path that led to connection and belonging? He didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for sure. Morel had shown him that there was more to life than just the road, more to life than just the endless miles and the lonely nights. She had shown him that there was room for connection, for companionship, even in the most solitary of lives. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the landscape, Silas pulled into a truck stop just outside of Tampa. He found a parking spot away from the noise and the crowds and shut off the engine. He climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Morel's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "Let's find us some dinner and a place to sleep." He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Morel's carrier on the seat beside him. The waitress, a friendly woman with a warm smile, came over to take his order. "Just coffee for me," Silas said, "and maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend." He gestured to the carrier. The waitress's eyes widened. "Oh, you have a cat," she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "She's adorable," Silas chuckled. "Yeah, she is. Found her by the roadside yesterday. She's been through a lot." The waitress's expression softened. "Poor thing. Well, we'll take good care of her here. I'll bring the milk right away." She returned a few minutes later with a small bowl of milk and a saucer of water. Silas carefully opened the carrier and placed the bowls inside. Morel sniffed at the milk, then lapped it up eagerly. The waitress lingered, watching Morel with a fond smile. "What's her name?" she asked. "Morel," Silas replied. "It means to wonder or to admire in French." The waitress's smile widened. "That's beautiful. It suits her perfectly." She paused. "Are you traveling far?" "Yeah," Silas said. "I'm a long-haul driver, headed back towards South Carolina tomorrow." The waitress nodded. "Well, you're welcome here any time. We love animals." She took his coffee order and left him to his thoughts. Silas watched Morel, a sense of contentment washing over him. He was tired, both physically and emotionally, but he was also strangely at peace. He had found something unexpected on the road, something that had given his life a new sense of purpose. He had found a companion, a friend, in the most unlikely of places. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. The next morning, Silas woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He had a delivery to make, a cat to care for, and a long drive ahead of him. He was ready for it all. He made a quick breakfast, packed up his belongings, and prepared Morel for the journey. He cleaned her litter box, refilled her food and water, bowls, and made sure her carrier was securely fastened to the passenger seat. He even bought a small toy mouse from the truck stop convenience store and placed it in her carrier. He wanted her to have something to play with during the long hours on the road. As he was finishing up, he received a phone call from Brenda. "Silas," she said, her voice brisk and efficient. "Just checking in. How's the delivery going?" "It's done," Silas replied. "Delivered it yesterday afternoon." "Good," Brenda said. "I've got another load for you, heading back towards South Carolina, leaving tomorrow morning." Silas sighed. He'd been hoping for a few days of rest before hitting the road again, but he knew he couldn't afford to turn down the work. "All right, Brenda," he said. "I'll be there." He hung up the phone and climbed into the cab, feeling a familiar mix of weariness and anticipation. He was tired of being on the road, tired of the endless miles and the lonely nights, but he also felt a sense of excitement, a desire to get back to South Carolina, to get back to the familiar rhythm of his life. He started the engine and pulled out of the truck stop, heading north on Route 75. The highway stretched before him, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the sprawling landscape. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields, illuminating the dew-kissed grass and the grazing cattle. Silas drove in silence, his thoughts drifting. He thought about Morel, about the changes she had brought into his life. He thought about his past, about the choices he had made, the roads he had taken. He thought about his future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. the paths he had yet to explore. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer alone. He had Morel, and that was enough. As the day wore on, the traffic began to thin. He left the hustle and bustle of Tampa behind, the city fading into the distance. The landscape changed, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and dense forests. Silas felt a sense of calm settle over him, a feeling of being at peace with the world. He was in his element on the open road, with the wind in his hair and the rumble of the engine beneath him. He glanced over at Morel, who was curled up in her carrier, seemingly content. He reached out and gently stroked her head. "We're going home, girl," he murmured. "Almost there." Morel let out a soft purr, as if in agreement. Silas smiled. He didn't have a traditional home, not in the sense that most people did. His home was the road, his cab, the truck stops and diners he frequented. But he had a sense of belonging, a feeling of being connected to the world around him. And now, with Morel by his side, that feeling was even stronger. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the sky, Silas pulled into a truck stop just outside of Savannah, Georgia. He was making good time, and he wanted to get as close to South Carolina as possible before stopping for the night. He found a parking spot away from the noise and the crowds and shut off the engine. He climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Morel's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "Let's find us some dinner and a place to sleep." He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Morel's carrier on the seat beside him. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, came over to take his order. "Just coffee for me," Silas said, "and maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend." He gestured to the carrier. The waitress's eyes widened. "Oh, you have a cat!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "She's beautiful," Silas chuckled. "Yeah, she is. Found her by the roadside a couple of days ago. She's been through a lot." The waitress's expression softened. "Poor thing. Well, we'll take good care of her here. I'll bring the milk right away." She returned a few minutes later with a small bowl of milk and a saucer of water. Silas carefully opened the carrier and placed the bowls inside. Morel sniffed at the milk, then lapped it up eagerly. The waitress lingered, watching Morel with a fond smile. "What's her name?" she asked. "Morel," Silas replied. "It means to wonder or to admire in French." The waitress's smile widened. "That's lovely. It suits her perfectly." She paused. "Are you traveling far?" "Yeah," Silas said. "I'm a long-haul driver. Headed back towards South Carolina tomorrow." The waitress nodded. "Well, you're welcome here any time. We love animals." She took his coffee order and left him to his thoughts. Silas watched Morel, a sense of contentment washing over him. He was tired, but he was also happy. He had found something unexpected on the road, something that had given his life a new sense of purpose. He had found a companion, a friend, in the most unlikely of places, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. After dinner, Silas bought a few supplies from the convenience store, a new litter box, some cat food, and a soft blanket for Morel's carrier. He wanted to make sure she was as comfortable as possible during the rest of the journey. He settled in for the night, Morel curled up in her carrier beside him. The rumble of the idling trucks outside was a constant presence, but it didn't bother Silas. He was used to the noise, and it almost felt comforting in a strange way. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought about his upcoming delivery in South Carolina. He was eager to get back on schedule, to prove to Brenda that he was still a reliable driver. But he was also reluctant to leave the road, to leave the solitude and the freedom it offered. He was torn between his old life and his new life, between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the same man he had been a few days ago. He had changed, and Morel had changed him. The next morning, Silas woke up early, eager to get back on the road. He made a quick breakfast, packed up his belongings, and prepared Morel for the final leg of the journey. He cleaned her litter box, refilled her food and water bowls, and made sure her carrier was securely fastened to the passenger seat. He even bought a small catnip toy from the convenience store and placed it in her carrier. He wanted her to have something to keep her entertained during the drive. As he was finishing up, he received a text message from Brenda. "Silas," it read. "Delivery time changed again. Now noon tomorrow. Customer wants it delivered directly to their warehouse in Charleston. Address attached." Silas sighed. This was getting ridiculous. He was now almost 2 full days behind schedule, and he was starting to worry about the consequences. He couldn't afford to lose this job. It was the only thing that kept him afloat, the only thing that gave his life any semblance of structure and purpose. He glanced at Muriel, who was watching him with those big amber eyes. He felt a pang of guilt. He'd taken on this responsibility, this little life, and now it was interfering with his work. Was he being selfish? Was he putting his own needs ahead of hers? He shook his head, pushing the doubts aside. He'd made a commitment to Morel, and he wasn't going to back down now. He would find a way to make it work, to balance his responsibilities to her with his responsibilities to his job. He sent a quick text message back to Brenda, confirming the new delivery time and address. Then he climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the truck stop, heading north on Route 95. The highway stretched before him, a familiar ribbon of asphalt leading him back towards South Carolina. The morning air was crisp and cool, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Silas drove in silence, his thoughts focused on the road ahead. He was eager to get back to his routine, to get back to the familiar rhythm of his life. But he also felt a sense of sadness, a feeling of loss. He knew that once he reached Charleston, his time with Morel would be coming to an end. He couldn't keep her in his truck forever. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't practical for him. He would have to find her a new home, a place where she could be safe and happy. The thought made his chest ache. He had grown attached to this small creature, this unexpected companion who had brought so much joy and meaning into his life. He didn't want to let her go. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape changed. The rolling hills and dense forests gave way to flat coastal plains and sprawling marshes. The air grew warmer and more humid, filled with the scent of salt and the cries of seagulls. Silas felt a sense of anticipation building within him. He was almost home. He glanced over at Morel, who was curled up in her carrier, seemingly unfazed by the changing scenery. He wondered what she would think of Charleston, of the bustling city and the crowded streets. Would she be scared? Would she miss the open road? He pushed the thoughts aside. He couldn't worry about that now. He had to focus on getting to Charleston, on making his delivery, on finding Morel a good home. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the sky, Silas pulled into a truck stop just outside of Charleston. He was close now, only a few more hours to go. He found a parking spot away from the noise and the crowds, and shut off the engine. He climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Morel's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "We're almost there. Just one more night on the road, and then we'll find you a new home." Morel let out another soft meow, as if in response. Silas felt a pang of sadness. He didn't want to think about saying goodbye to her. He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Morel's carrier on the seat beside him. The waitress, a young woman with a friendly smile, came over to take his order. "Just coffee for me," Silas said. And maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend. He gestured to the carrier. The waitress's eyes widened. "Oh, you have a cat," she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "She's adorable," Silas chuckled. "Yeah, she is. Found her by the roadside a few days ago. She's been through a lot." The waitress's expression softened. "Poor thing. Well, we'll take good care of her here. I'll bring the milk right away." She returned a few minutes later with a small bowl of milk and a saucer of water. Silas carefully opened the carrier and placed the bowls inside. Morel sniffed at the milk, then lapped it up eagerly. The waitress lingered, watching Morel with a fond smile. "What's her name?" she asked. "Morel," Silas replied. "It means to wonder or to admire in French." The waitress's smile widened. "That's lovely. It suits her perfectly." She paused. "Are you traveling far?" "Yeah," Silas said. "I'm a long-haul driver, headed into Charleston tomorrow to make a delivery." The waitress nodded. "Well, you're welcome here anytime. We love animals." She took his coffee order and left him to his thoughts. Silas watched Morel, a sense of melancholy washing over him. He was so close to his destination, so close to the end of his journey with Morel. He didn't want it to end. He had grown so attached to her, so used to her quiet companionship. He didn't know how he was going to say goodbye. The final leg of the journey to Charleston was bittersweet for Silas. The closer he got to the city, the more his anxiety grew about finding Morel a good home. He knew he couldn't keep her, not permanently, but the thought of parting with her filled him with a strange sense of loss. He had grown so accustomed to her quiet presence, her gentle purrs, her unwavering companionship. She had become a part of his life in a way he never expected, and the thought of saying goodbye was almost unbearable. He tried to focus on the task at hand, on making his delivery on time, and finding a suitable home for Morel. He had done some research online the night before, searching for animal shelters and rescue organizations in Charleston. He had found a few promising leads, but he was hesitant to commit to anything until he had seen them in person. He wanted to make sure that Morel would be going to a safe and loving environment, a place where she would be cared for and cherished. As he drove into Charleston, the city unfolded before him in a vibrant tapestry of history and modernity. The narrow streets were lined with colorful houses, their porches adorned with hanging baskets and rocking chairs. The air was filled with the sounds of horse-drawn carriages, street musicians, and the chatter of tourists. Silas navigated the traffic with practiced ease, his truck a behemoth among the smaller vehicles. He found the warehouse where he was supposed to make his delivery, a sprawling brick building on the waterfront. He parked the truck, secured the brakes, and climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He walked around to the back of the trailer and opened the doors, ready to unload his cargo. A middle-aged man in a polo shirt and khakis approached him, clipboard in hand. "You're the driver from O'Connell Trucking?" he asked, his voice friendly and welcoming. "Yeah," Silas replied. "That's me." The man checked his clipboard. "All right, let's get this unloaded. We're a little behind schedule, but we should be able to get you out of here in a couple of hours." Silas nodded and began to unload the cargo, the man helping him with a hand truck. It was a relatively easy job, and they worked quickly and efficiently. As they worked, the man struck up a conversation. "So, you're a long-haul driver, huh?" he asked. "Yeah," Silas replied. "Been doing it for over 30 years. The man whistled. "That's a long time. Must be tough being away from home so much." Silas shrugged. "It's what I know. It's my life." The man nodded. "I guess everyone's got their own path. I'm just a local guy. Been working at this warehouse for 10 years now." They worked in silence for a few more minutes. Then the man spoke again. "Hey, I couldn't help but notice. You got a cat in your cab." Silas hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his personal life with strangers. "Yeah," he admitted. "Found her by the roadside a few days ago, taking care of her." The man's eyes widened. "No kidding. That's awesome, man. I'm a big cat lover myself. Got 3 of them at home." Silas smiled. "They're good company." They finished unloading the cargo, and the man handed Silas a receipt. "All right, that's all set. Thanks for the delivery." "No problem," Silas replied. He climbed back into his cab, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He'd made the delivery on time, despite the delays, and he'd even connected with another cat lover. It was a small victory, but it was enough to lift his spirits. He glanced over at Morel, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "Well, girl," he said, his voice soft. "We did it. We made it to Charleston." Morel let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas started the engine and pulled out of the loading dock, heading towards the city centre. He had some time to kill before. He needed to find a place to park for the night, so he decided to explore the city a bit. He drove slowly through the narrow streets, admiring the historic architecture and the vibrant atmosphere. He passed by Rainbow Row, a colourful collection of houses that looked like something out of a postcard. He drove along the waterfront, watching the boats bobbing in the harbour and the seagulls soaring overhead. He even stopped at a small park and let Morel out of her carrier for a few minutes. She explored the park cautiously, sniffing at the grass and chasing after fallen leaves. Silas watched her, a sense of joy filling him. It was good to see her enjoying herself, to see her running and playing like a normal cat. For a moment, he forgot about the sadness of saying goodbye, about the uncertainty of her future. He just focused on the present moment, on the simple pleasure of watching her be happy. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the city, Silas knew it was time to find a place to park for the night. He found a truck stop on the outskirts of Charleston, a large and bustling place, filled with the sounds of idling trucks and the chatter of other drivers. He parked the truck, secured the brakes, and climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Morel's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "Let's find us some dinner and a place to sleep, and then tomorrow we'll find you a new home." Morel let out another soft meow, as if in response. Silas felt a pang of sadness. He didn't want to think about saying goodbye to her. He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Morel's carrier. On the seat beside him, the waitress, a young woman with a friendly smile, came over to take his order. "Just coffee for me," Silas said, "and maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend." He gestured to the carrier. The waitress's eyes widened. "Oh, you have a cat!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "She's adorable," Silas chuckled. "Yeah, she is. Found her by the roadside a few days ago. She's been through a lot." The waitress's expression softened. "Poor thing. Well, we'll take good care of her here. I'll bring the milk right away." She returned a few minutes later with a small bowl of milk and a saucer of water. Silas carefully opened the carrier and placed the bowls inside. Morel sniffed at the milk, then lapped it up eagerly. The waitress lingered, watching Morel with a fond smile. "What's her name?" she asked. "Morel," Silas replied. "It means to wonder or to admire in French." The waitress's smile widened. "That's lovely. It suits her perfectly." She paused. "Are you travelling far?" "Yeah," Silas said. "I'm a long-haul driver, but I'm staying in Charleston for a couple of days." The waitress nodded. "Well, you're welcome here any time. We love animals." She took his coffee order and left him to his thoughts. Silas watched Morel, a sense of melancholy washing over him. He was so close to finding her a new home, so close to saying goodbye. He didn't want it to end. He had grown so attached to her, so used to her quiet companionship. He didn't know how he was going to do it. After dinner, Silas bought a few supplies from the convenience store, a new litter box, some cat food, and a soft blanket for Morel's carrier. He wanted to make sure she was as comfortable as possible during their last night together. He settled in for the night, Morel curled up in her carrier beside him. The rumble of the idling trucks outside was a constant presence, but it didn't bother Silas. He was used to the noise, and it almost felt comforting in a strange way. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought about the animal shelters and rescue organizations he had found online. He made a mental list of the places he wanted to visit the next day, the places where he hoped Morel would find her forever home. He prayed that he would make the right decision, that he would find a place where she would be safe, loved, and happy. The next morning, Silas woke up early, his heart heavy with the task ahead. He made a quick breakfast, packed up his belongings, and prepared Morel for the day. He cleaned her litter box, refilled her food and water bowls, and made sure her carrier was securely fastened to the passenger seat. He even bought a new toy mouse from the convenience store and placed it in her carrier. He wanted her to have something to play with during their visits to the shelters. As he was finishing up, he received a phone call from Brenda. "Silas," she said, her voice brisk and efficient. "Just checking in. How's the delivery going?" "It's done," Silas replied. "Delivered it yesterday afternoon." "Good," Brenda said. "I've got another load for you. Heading back towards Georgia. Leaving tomorrow morning." Silas sighed. He had been hoping for a few more days in Charleston, a few more days with Morel, but he knew he couldn't afford to turn down the work. "All right, Brenda," he said. "I'll be there." He hung up the phone and climbed into the cab, feeling a familiar mix of weariness and determination. He was ready to find Morel a new home, even though it broke his heart to think about saying goodbye. He started the engine and pulled out of the truck stop, heading towards the first animal shelter on his list. The shelter was located in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Charleston. It was a small but well-maintained building with a fenced-in yard where dogs barked and played. Silas parked the truck on the street and carefully lifted out Morel's carrier. He took a deep breath, trying to steel himself for the task ahead, and walked towards the entrance. The receptionist, a young woman with a kind face, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you today?" "I found a cat," Silas replied, his voice gruff. "She needs a home." The receptionist's smile widened. "Oh, we're always happy to help. Come on in." She led Silas into a small waiting room and gestured for him to have a seat. "We'll need you to fill out some paperwork," she said. "Just some basic information about the cat and yourself." Silas nodded and sat down, placing Morel's carrier on the floor beside him. He filled out the paperwork quickly and efficiently, his mind racing with thoughts of Morel's future. After a few minutes, the receptionist returned and led him into a larger room where cats were housed in individual cages. The room was clean and well lit, but it was also filled with the sounds of meowing and the scent of litter. Silas felt a pang of sadness as he looked at the cats, each one waiting patiently for a new home. He knew that Morel belonged in a place like this, a place where she would be safe and cared for. But he also knew that it would be hard to leave her here, to walk away and never see her again. The receptionist introduced him to the shelter director, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. "So, you found this cat?" the director asked, her eyes scanning Morel in her carrier. "Yeah," Silas replied. "Found her by the roadside a few days ago. She's been through a lot." The director nodded. "We can tell. She's underweight and has some signs of neglect. But she's a beautiful cat. We'll find her a good home." She paused. "Do you want to leave her with us today?" Silas hesitated. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. "Can I visit her again tomorrow?" he asked. "Before I head out of town?" The director considered for a moment. "All right," she said. "But we'll need to get her started on her intake process today. We'll give her a checkup, get her vaccinated, and put her up for adoption." Silas nodded, his heart heavy. "Okay," he said. "I understand." He reached into the carrier and gently stroked Morel's head. "I'll see you tomorrow, girl," he murmured. "I promise." He handed the carrier to the director and watched as she carried Morel away. He felt a lump forming in his throat, a tightness in his chest. He wanted to turn back, to take Morel with him, but he knew it was for the best. He turned and walked out of the shelter, his footsteps heavy. He climbed back into his truck, feeling empty and alone. He drove away from the shelter, his eyes blurred with tears. He had done the right thing, he knew he had, but it didn't make it any easier to say goodbye. Silas spent the rest of the day in a daze, his thoughts consumed by Morel. He drove aimlessly around Charleston, stopping at various landmarks and attractions, but he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had settled over him. He visited the Charleston City Market, a bustling marketplace filled with local crafts and souvenirs. He walked along the Battery, a scenic waterfront promenade with stunning views of the harbor. He even took a horse-drawn carriage ride through the historic district, trying to immerse himself in the charm and beauty of the city. But nothing could distract him from the ache in his heart, the longing for the small cat who had brought so much light into his life. He kept replaying their time together in his mind, the moments of quiet companionship, the gentle purrs, the playful antics. He remembered the first time he had seen her, huddled and trembling by the roadside, her eyes filled with fear and resignation. He remembered the moment he had decided to take her with him, the unexpected surge of compassion that had overridden his usual pragmatism. He wondered if he had made the right decision. Had he been selfish, keeping her with him for so long, delaying her chances of finding a permanent home? Or had he given her something she desperately needed, a temporary respite from her suffering, a glimpse of kindness and care? He didn't know the answer, but he knew that he would never forget the impact she had had on his life. She had awakened something in him, a capacity for tenderness and connection that he had thought was long gone. She had reminded him that even in the midst of loneliness and isolation, there was still room for love and compassion. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Silas found himself drawn back to the waterfront. He parked his truck near the Battery and walked along the promenade, watching the boats returning to the harbor and the seagulls circling overhead. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, but Silas felt strangely detached from the lively atmosphere. He was lost in his own thoughts, his heart heavy with the impending farewell. He sat down on a bench overlooking the water, Morel's carrier beside him. He opened the carrier and gently lifted her out, holding her close to his chest. She purred softly, nuzzling against his neck. Silas stroked her fur, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "Oh, Morel," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to say goodbye." Morel let out a soft meow as if in response. Silas closed his eyes, savoring the moment, trying to imprint her image in his memory. He didn't know how long they sat there, but eventually the sky darkened and the stars began to appear. Silas knew it was time to go. He carefully placed Myril back in her carrier and stood up, his legs feeling heavy. He walked back to his truck, his footsteps slow and reluctant. He climbed into the cab, feeling the familiar sense of isolation closing in on him. He started, the engine, the rumble of the diesel filling the silence. He drove away from the waterfront, his eyes blurred with tears. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay in Charleston any longer. He couldn't bear the thought of saying goodbye to Morel. He drove through the night, the highway stretching before him like an endless ribbon. He didn't pay attention to the direction, his mind focused solely on Morel. He thought about the animal shelter, about the cats in their cages, waiting patiently for a new home. He thought about the director, her no-nonsense demeanor, her promise to find Morel a good family. He wondered if he could trust them, if they would truly care for her, if they would give her the love and attention she deserved. He knew he was being irrational. He knew that the shelter was a reputable organization, that they had a good track record of finding homes for abandoned animals. But he couldn't shake the feeling of doubt, the fear that Morel would be lost in the system, forgotten and neglected. As the hours passed, Silas's anxiety grew. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving Morel in a cage, surrounded by strangers. He couldn't bear the thought of never seeing her again. He made a decision. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Brenda's number. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed the call button. Brenda answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and efficient. "Silas," she said. "What's up?" "Brenda," Silas began, his voice rough. "I need to ask you for a favor." Brenda sighed. "What is it, Silas? I'm busy." "I need to postpone my next load," Silas said. "I can't leave tomorrow." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Silas could almost hear Brenda's brain processing this information. "Postpone?" she repeated slowly. "Silas O'Connell, you've never postponed a load in your life. What's going on?" Silas hesitated, unsure how to explain. "It's the cat," he said finally. "I can't leave her. I can't leave her at the shelter." Brenda was silent for a moment. "The cat?" she asked. "You're postponing a load for a cat?" "Yeah," Silas admitted. "I know it sounds crazy, but I can't leave her. Not yet." Brenda sighed again. "All right, Silas," she said. "I'll see what I can do. But you owe me big time for this." "Thanks, Brenda," Silas said, relief flooding through him. "I appreciate it." "Don't mention it," Brenda grumbled. "Just don't make a habit of this, O'Connell. I'm not running a charity here." Silas chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it, Brenda. See you soon." He hung up the phone and leaned back in his seat, a sense of calm settling over him. He had made his decision. He was going back for Morel. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. He turned the truck around and headed back towards Charleston, his heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Morel go. He would find a way to make it work, to balance his life on the road with his responsibility to this small creature who had brought so much light into his life. As he drove through the night, the stars shining brightly above him, Silas felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Maybe, just maybe, he could have it all. He could have the freedom of the open road and the companionship of a loving friend. He could have the solitude he craved and the connection he needed. He just had to be brave enough to reach for it. Silas arrived back at the animal shelter early the next morning, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. He parked the truck on the street and took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he was ready to face whatever came his way. He climbed out of the cab and walked towards the entrance, his footsteps firm and determined. The receptionist, the same young woman who had greeted him the day before, recognized him immediately. "Good morning," she said, her smile warm and welcoming. "Welcome back." "Morning," Silas replied, his voice gruff but friendly. "I'm here to check on the cat I brought in yesterday." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, of course. Let me get the director for you." She disappeared into the back room, leaving Silas to wait in the small waiting area. He paced back and forth, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. He wondered what the director would say, how she would react to his change of heart. Would she be angry, disappointed, or would she understand his attachment to Morel? After what seemed like an eternity, the director emerged from the back room, her expression unreadable. "Mr. O'Connell," she said, her voice calm and professional. "We were wondering when you would be back." Silas's heart sank. I'm sorry," he stammered. "I know I said I was leaving her here, but I've changed my mind. I can't leave her. I want to take her with me." The director was silent for a moment, her eyes studying him intently. Silas braced himself for her disapproval, for her lecture on the importance of commitment and responsibility. But instead, she surprised him. "All right," she said simply. "We understand." Silas's eyes widened in disbelief. You do?" The director nodded. "We see it all the time. People bring in animals, intending to give them up, but then they change their minds. It's not uncommon. She paused. But you need to understand, Mr. O'Connell, this is a big responsibility. Taking care of an animal is a commitment. It requires time, money, and patience. Are you prepared for that? Silas nodded firmly. Yes, he said. I am. I've thought about it, and I'm ready. I want to give Morel a good home. I want to give her the life she deserves. The director's expression softened slightly. All right, she said again. Then we'll get her ready for you. We've already given her a checkup and her vaccinations. She's healthy, just a little underweight. We'll give you some food and medication to take with you, and we'll schedule a follow-up appointment to make sure she's doing well. Silas felt a wave of relief wash over him. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. The director smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. You're welcome, Mr. O'Connell. We're happy for both of you. She disappeared into the back room again, leaving Silas to wait. He couldn't believe his luck. He had come so close to losing Morel, but now he was taking her home with him. He felt a surge of gratitude towards the director, towards the animal shelter, towards the universe itself. He had been given a second chance, a chance to do things differently, a chance to open his heart and embrace the unexpected. After a few minutes, the director returned, carrying Morel in her carrier. Morel meowed softly, her eyes bright and alert. She seemed to recognize Silas, her purrs growing louder as he approached. Here she is, the director said, handing him the carrier. She's all set to go. Silas took the carrier gently, his hands trembling slightly. Thank you, he said again, his voice choked with emotion. I don't know how to express my gratitude. The director smiled. Just take good care of her, Mr. O'Connell. That's all we ask. She handed him a bag of supplies and a list of instructions. This is her food, her medication, and her vaccination records. And here's the number for the clinic in case you have any questions or concerns. Silas nodded, taking the bag and the instructions. I will, he said. I promise. He looked down at Morel, who was watching him with those big amber eyes. He reached into the carrier and gently stroked her head. Ready to go home, girl? He murmured. Morel let out a soft purr, as if in agreement. Silas lifted the carrier and turned to leave, his heart filled with a joy he hadn't felt in years. He thanked the director and the receptionist one last time and walked out of the shelter, his footsteps light and eager. He climbed back into his truck, feeling like a new man. He had Morel, and that was all that mattered. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading north on Route 95. The highway stretched before him, a familiar ribbon of asphalt leading him back towards Georgia. But this time, the road felt different. It felt like a path of possibility, a journey of discovery. He was no longer alone. He had a companion, a friend, a reason to keep moving forward. As he drove, Silas thought about the changes he would need to make in his life. He would need to adjust his schedule, to find a way to balance his work with his responsibility to Morel. He would need to make his cab more comfortable for her, to create a space where she could feel safe and secure. He would even need to learn more about cat care, about feeding, grooming, and playing with her. It was a daunting task, but Silas was determined to make it work. He had spent his entire life adapting to the challenges of the road, and he knew he could adapt to this new challenge as well. He glanced over at Morel, who was curled up in her carrier, seemingly content. He reached out and gently touched her side, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. We're going to be okay, girl, he murmured. We'll figure it out together. Morel let out a soft purr, as if in agreement. Silas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He had found something unexpected on the road, something that had changed his life in ways he never imagined. He had found a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the landscape, Silas pulled into a truck stop just outside of Savannah, Georgia. He was making good time, and he wanted to get as close to his next load as possible before stopping for the night. He found a parking spot away from the noise and the crowds and shut off the engine. He climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Mirelle's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "Let's find us some dinner and a place to sleep." He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Mirelle's carrier on the seat beside him. The waitress, the same friendly woman who had served him a few nights before, recognized him immediately. "Welcome back," she said, her smile warm and welcoming. "How was your trip?" "It was eventful," Silas replied, chuckling softly. "But I'm back, and I've got my friend with me." He gestured to the carrier. The waitress's eyes widened. "Oh, you kept her," she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "That's wonderful." Silas nodded. "Yeah, I did. I couldn't leave her. She's special." The waitress smiled. "I can see that. She's beautiful." She paused. "So, what will you have tonight?" "Just coffee for me," Silas said. "And maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend." He glanced down at Mirelle, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "And maybe a small piece of chicken, if you have any." The waitress's smile widened. "Of course, I'll bring it right away." She returned a few minutes later with his coffee, Mirelle's milk and chicken, and a small bowl of water. Silas carefully opened the carrier and placed the bowls inside. Mirelle sniffed at the food, then lapped it up eagerly. The waitress lingered, watching Mirelle with a fond smile. "What's her name again?" she asked. "Mirelle," Silas replied. "It means to wonder or to admire in French." The waitress nodded. "It suits her perfectly. She's a wonder, and she's certainly admirable." She paused. "So, are you two traveling far?" "Yeah," Silas said. "I'm a long-haul driver, headed back towards Georgia tomorrow to pick up another load." The waitress's eyes widened. "Wow, that's amazing. You're taking her on the road with you," Silas chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I am. It's a new experience for both of us." The waitress smiled. "Well, you're welcome here anytime. We'll always be happy to see you and Mirelle." She took his coffee order and left him to his thoughts. Silas watched Mirelle, a sense of contentment washing over him. He was tired, but he was also happy. He had made a decision that had changed his life, and he had no regrets. He had found a companion, a friend, a reason to keep moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments for Silas and Mirelle. Silas had to rework his entire routine to accommodate his new companion. He spent his days on the road, driving long hours, but he made sure to take frequent breaks to check on Mirelle, to feed her, and to clean her litter box. He even rigged up a small hammock for her in the cab, using an old blanket and some bungee cords. He wanted her to have a comfortable place to sleep, a place where she could feel safe and secure. At night, Silas would find truck stops that were pet-friendly, places where he could let Mirelle out of her carrier and allow her to explore. He would take her for walks on a leash, careful to keep her close to him. He didn't want her to get lost or injured in the unfamiliar surroundings. He would also spend time playing with her, using a laser pointer or a toy mouse to keep her entertained. He was surprised at how much he enjoyed these moments of playfulness, how much joy he found in Mirelle's simple antics. He even started talking to her, telling her about his day, about his thoughts and feelings. He had always been a man of few words, but with Mirelle, he found himself opening up, sharing things he had never shared with anyone before. He told her about his childhood, about his family, about his dreams and regrets. He told her about the loneliness of the road, the isolation of his life, the walls he had built around himself. And Mirelle would listen patiently, her amber eyes fixed on him, her soft purrs filling the silence. Silas also had to adjust his finances to account for Morel's needs. He bought her the best food he could afford, along with litter, toys, and a comfortable carrier. He even set aside a small emergency fund in case she needed medical care. He was surprised at how much it cost to care for a cat, but he didn't mind. He was willing to sacrifice his own comfort and convenience for Morel's well-being. He also had to deal with the reactions of other people. Some truckers were amused by his new companion, teasing him about becoming a cat dad. Others were more critical, questioning his sanity for taking on such a responsibility. But Silas didn't care what anyone else thought. He knew that he had made the right decision, that Morel had brought something special into his life, something he wouldn't trade for anything. Brenda, his dispatcher, was surprisingly supportive. She had initially been skeptical about Silas's decision to keep Morel, but she had come to accept it. She even started asking about Morel whenever she called, inquiring about her health and her behavior. Silas suspected that Brenda was a secret animal lover, despite her gruff exterior. As the weeks passed, Silas and Morel settled into a comfortable routine. They were a team, two unlikely companions navigating the challenges of the road together. Silas learned to be more patient, more flexible, more open to the unexpected. Morel, in turn, blossomed under his care. Her fur became softer and shinier, her eyes brighter and more alert. She gained weight and energy, and she started to play and explore with more confidence. Silas realized that Morel had not only changed his life, but she had also changed him. He was no longer the same solitary, hardened man he had been before. He had become more compassionate, more empathetic, more connected to the world around him. He had learned that it was okay to need someone, to care for someone, to love someone. And he had learned that even in the midst of loneliness, there was still room for connection and joy. One evening, Silas pulled into a truck stop in Mississippi. He had been driving for hours, and he was exhausted. He parked the truck, secured the brakes, and climbed out of the cab, stretching his stiff muscles. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Morel's carrier. She blinked in the dim light, then let out a soft meow. "All right, girl," Silas said, his voice gentle. "Let's find us some dinner and a place to sleep." He carried the carrier into the truck stop, his eyes scanning the crowded interior. There was a diner, a convenience store, and a small lounge area. He decided to start with the diner. He found a booth in a quiet corner and placed Morel's carrier on the seat beside him. The waitress, a young woman with a friendly smile, came over to take his order. "Just coffee for me," Silas said. "And maybe a small bowl of milk for my friend." He gestured to the carrier. The waitress's eyes widened. "Oh, you have a cat!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. "She's adorable," Silas chuckled. "Yeah, she is. Her name is Morel." The waitress smiled. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Sarah." She paused. "So, are you two traveling far?" "Yeah," Silas said. "I'm a long-haul driver, headed towards Texas tomorrow." Sarah's eyes widened. "Wow, that's amazing. You're taking her all the way to Texas with you?" Silas nodded. "Yeah, I am. She's my co-pilot." Sarah giggled. "Well, you're welcome here anytime. We love animals." She took his coffee order and left him to his thoughts. Silas watched Morel, a sense of contentment washing over him. He was tired, but he was also happy. He had found a rhythm, a balance, between his life on the road and his responsibility to Morel. He had learned to adjust, to adapt, to embrace the unexpected, and he knew that he could face whatever the future held, as long as he had Morel by his side. The journey to Texas was long and demanding, but Silas didn't mind. He had Morel by his side, and that made all the difference. He enjoyed her company, her quiet presence, her occasional playful antics. She was a constant source of comfort and joy, a reminder that he was no longer alone in the world. As they traveled westward, Silas noticed that Morel was becoming more confident and adventurous. She would often climb out of her carrier while he was driving, exploring the cab with curiosity and enthusiasm. She would perch on the dashboard, watching the road ahead with rapt attention. She would curl up on the passenger seat, napping peacefully in the warmth of the sun. She would even try to climb onto Silas's lap while he was driving, much to his amusement and concern. Silas had to be firm with her about that, gently but firmly redirecting her to a safer spot. He didn't want her to distract him while he was behind the wheel. One afternoon, as they were driving through Oklahoma, Silas received an unexpected call from Brenda. "Silas," she said, her voice unusually hesitant. "I have a special request for you." Silas frowned. "What is it, Brenda?" "Well," Brenda began, "there's a package that needs to be delivered. It's delicate." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Delicate? What kind of package?" Brenda sighed. "It's a kitten, a very young kitten. It needs to be transported from a breeder in Oklahoma City to a family in Dallas." Silas was speechless. "You want me to transport a kitten?" Brenda's voice was firm. "Yes, Silas, and I know you're the right person for the job." Silas hesitated. He had never transported a live animal before, especially not such a fragile one. He wasn't sure if he was equipped for the task. "Brenda, I don't know." Brenda interrupted him. "Silas, please, this kitten is very special to this family. They've been waiting for months to get her, and the breeder trusts us to deliver her safely." Silas sighed. He couldn't refuse Brenda's request. She had been good to him, especially after he had asked her to postpone his load so he could keep Morel. He owed her one. "All right, Brenda," he said finally. "I'll do it. But you need to give me all the details. I need to know everything about this kitten." Brenda breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Silas. I knew I could count on you. I'll send you the breeder's contact information and the family's address. The breeder will give you the kitten and all the necessary instructions." Silas hung up the phone, feeling a mix of apprehension and excitement. He had never transported a kitten before, but he was willing to give it a try. He was also curious about this new passenger. He wondered what she would be like, what her personality would be. He glanced over at Morel, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "Well, girl," he said, his voice soft. "Looks like we're getting some company." Morel let out a soft purr, as if in agreement. The next morning, Silas arrived in Oklahoma City and contacted the breeder. The breeder, a friendly woman named Carol, greeted him warmly and introduced him to the kitten. The kitten was tiny and fluffy, with big blue eyes and a playful demeanor. She was a ragdoll, a breed known for its gentle and affectionate nature. Carol handed Silas a carrier, a bag of food, and a list of instructions. "Her name is Luna," Carol said, her voice filled with affection. "She's 8 weeks old, and she's very sweet. She's been vaccinated and dewormed, and she's in perfect health." Silas carefully placed Luna's carrier in the cab, making sure it was secure and comfortable. He introduced Luna to Morel, keeping them separated at first. Morel was curious about the new arrival, sniffing at the carrier and meowing softly. Luna, in turn, seemed unfazed by the presence of the older cat. She was more interested in exploring her surroundings, batting at the toys in her carrier and purring contentedly. Silas started the engine and headed towards Dallas, feeling a sense of responsibility and excitement. He had 2 passengers now, 2 precious lives in his care. He drove carefully and cautiously, making sure to take frequent breaks to check on Luna and Morel. He fed them, watered them, and cleaned their litter boxes. He even played with them, using a laser pointer and a toy mouse to keep them entertained. Morel and Luna quickly became friends. They would play together in the cab, chasing each other and wrestling playfully. They would also nap together, curled up side by side in the hammock. Silas was amused by their antics, their energy and enthusiasm. They brought a new level of joy and liveliness to his life on the road. As they approached Dallas, Silas contacted the family who was waiting for Luna. The family, a young couple named Emily and David, were overjoyed to hear that their kitten was on her way. They met Silas at a designated location on the outskirts of Dallas, their faces filled with excitement and anticipation. Silas carefully lifted Luna's carrier out of the cab and handed it to Emily. Emily opened the carrier and gasped, her eyes widening with delight. "She's perfect!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with emotion. "She's even more beautiful than we imagined." David, Emily's husband, reached into the carrier and gently stroked Luna's head. "Thank you so much," he said to Silas, his voice sincere. "Thank you for taking such good care of her." Silas smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. He had successfully completed his mission. He had delivered Luna safely to her new family. He had brought joy and happiness into their lives. "You're welcome," he said. "It was my pleasure." As Emily and David drove away with Luna, Silas felt a pang of sadness. He was going to miss the little kitten, her playful energy, her sweet purrs. But he was also happy for her. She had found a loving home, a family who would cherish and care for her. He glanced over at Morel, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "Well, girl," he said, his voice soft, "it's just us again." Morel let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas started the engine and headed towards his next destination, feeling a sense of gratitude and contentment. He had learned something new on this journey. He had learned that even the most unexpected tasks could bring unexpected rewards. He had learned that even the smallest creatures could have the biggest impact on our lives. After delivering Luna to her new family in Dallas, Silas felt a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. He had successfully completed an unusual task, and he had brought joy into the lives of others. He was also proud of Morel, who had been a patient and gentle companion. To the little kitten, she had shown a surprising level of maturity and responsibility, and Silas had grown even more fond of her. He decided to treat himself and Morel to a few days of rest and relaxation before hitting the road again. He found a pet-friendly hotel in Dallas and booked a room for 3 nights. The hotel was comfortable and clean, with a small park nearby where Silas could take Morel for walks. They spent their days exploring the city, visiting the Dallas World Aquarium, the Dallas Museum of Art, and the 6th floor museum at Dealey Plaza. Silas even took Morel to a local pet store, where he bought her some new toys and treats. Morel was in heaven, batting at the toys and purring with delight. Silas watched her, a smile playing on his lips. He was grateful for these moments of simple joy, these moments of connection and companionship. He had come to realize that Morel was more than just a pet. She was his friend, his confidant, his family. On their last night in Dallas, Silas decided to treat himself to a nice dinner. He found a restaurant that allowed pets on their patio and made a reservation. The restaurant was upscale and elegant, with soft lighting and live music. Silas dressed in his best jeans and a clean shirt, feeling a bit out of place in the sophisticated atmosphere. He carefully placed Morel's carrier on the floor beside his table and ordered a steak. As he was enjoying his meal, he noticed a familiar face across the patio. It was Amber, the receptionist from the Riverdale Animal Hospital, the place where he had first taken Morel. Silas was stunned. What were the chances of running into her here, in Dallas? He couldn't believe his eyes. He watched her for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. She looked as beautiful and kind as he remembered, her smile warm and genuine. He hesitated, unsure whether to approach her. He hadn't seen her since he had left the animal hospital with Morel, and he didn't know how she would react to seeing him again. He was also a bit nervous, feeling self-conscious about his appearance and his lifestyle. But then, Morel let out a soft meow, as if sensing his hesitation. Silas took a deep breath and stood up, his footsteps firm and determined. He walked over to Amber's table, his heart pounding in his chest. "Amber," he said, his voice slightly trembling. Amber looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Silas," she exclaimed, "what are you doing here?" "I'm just passing through," Silas replied, his voice gruff but friendly. "I'm a long-haul driver, remember?" Amber smiled. "Of course, how could I forget? And how's Morel? Is she doing well?" Silas's face softened. "She's doing great," he said, She's right here. He gestured to Morel's carrier. Amber's eyes lit up. Oh, can I see her? Silas nodded and carefully opened the carrier. Morel stepped out, stretching and yawning. She looked much healthier and happier than she had when Amber had first seen her. Her fur was soft and shiny, her eyes bright and alert. Amber reached out and gently stroked Morel's head. Oh, she's beautiful, she said, her voice filled with affection. You've taken such good care of her, Silas. Silas blushed, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. I try, he said. She's special. Amber smiled. I can see that. You two seem very close. Silas nodded. We are. She's my family. Amber's smile grew even wider. That's wonderful, Silas. I'm so happy for you both. She paused. So, what are you doing in Dallas? I told you. I'm just passing through, Silas said. I had a delivery to make, and I decided to stay for a few days. Oh, Amber said, her expression slightly disappointed. Well, I'm here visiting family. I'm staying for a few more days. Silas's eyes lit up. Really? Maybe we could spend some time together. Amber hesitated for a moment, then smiled. I'd like that, Silas. I'd like that very much. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories about their lives and their experiences. Silas learned that Amber was a veterinarian technician, that she loved animals, and that she had always dreamed of traveling the world. Amber, in turn, learned about Silas's life on the road, about his loneliness and his struggles, and about the unexpected joy that Morel had brought into his life. They discovered that they had a lot in common, a shared love for animals, a deep appreciation for the simple things in life, and a longing for connection and companionship. As the evening drew to a close, Silas felt a sense of hope and excitement. He had found something unexpected in Dallas, something that had the potential to change his life forever. He had found a connection with Amber, a woman who understood him, who appreciated him, and who shared his love for Morel. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he wanted to explore this connection further. He wanted to see where it might lead. The next few days in Dallas were a delightful detour from Silas's usual routine. He and Amber spent as much time together as possible, exploring the city, sharing meals, and simply enjoying each other's company. They visited the Dallas Arboretum and Botanical Garden, where they strolled hand in hand through the colorful displays of flowers and plants. They took a walk along the Katy Trail, a scenic path that wound through the heart of the city. They even went to a drive-in movie, where they shared popcorn and cuddled under a blanket. Silas felt a sense of happiness and contentment he hadn't experienced in years. Amber was easy to talk to, her laughter infectious, her presence comforting. She seemed to understand him in a way that no one else ever had. She didn't judge him for his lifestyle, for his loneliness, for his gruff exterior. She saw the kindness and the vulnerability beneath the surface, and she embraced him for who he was. Morel, too, seemed to enjoy Amber's company. She would often curl up in Amber's lap, purring contentedly, and she would follow her around the hotel room, rubbing against her legs. Silas was touched by the bond that had formed between the two of them. It was as if Morel sensed that Amber was special, that she was someone who could bring happiness into their lives. As their time together drew to a close, Silas felt a pang of sadness. He didn't want to say goodbye to Amber. He had grown so attached to her, so dependent on her presence. But he knew that they both had their own lives to return to. He had his job on the road, and she had her work at the animal hospital. They couldn't simply abandon their responsibilities. On their last evening together, Silas took Amber to a rooftop restaurant with a panoramic view of the city. The sky was ablaze with color as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the skyline. They shared a romantic dinner, their conversation filled with laughter and longing. As they lingered over their coffee, Silas took Amber's hand in his. "Amber," he said, his voice soft. "I don't want this to end." Amber's eyes filled with tears. "Neither do I, Silas," she said. "These past few days have been Magical. Silas took a deep breath. I know we both have to go back to our own lives, he said. But maybe we could stay in touch. Maybe we could visit each other when we can. Amber smiled, her tears turning into a look of hope. I'd like that very much, Silas, she said. I'd like that more than anything. They exchanged phone numbers and promised to call each other regularly. They talked about their schedules, trying to find ways to coordinate their visits. Silas even suggested that Amber could ride with him on the road sometimes, accompanying him on his deliveries. Amber's eyes widened with excitement. Really, Silas? She asked. Would you really want me to do that? Silas chuckled. Of course. I'd love to have your company, and I know Morel would be thrilled to have you around. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, their hearts filled with hope and anticipation. They knew that it wouldn't be easy to maintain a long-distance relationship, but they were willing to try. They had found something special in each other, something worth fighting for. The next morning, Silas drove Amber to the airport. The parting was bittersweet, filled with hugs and promises. As he watched her walk through the security gate, Silas felt a pang of sadness, but he also felt a sense of excitement and determination. He had a new purpose in his life now. He had someone to look forward to, someone to share his life with. He was no longer just a solitary trucker driving endlessly across the country. He was a man with a connection, a man with a future. He climbed back into his truck, Morel purring softly beside him. Well, girl, he said, his voice filled with anticipation. Looks like we have a new destination. Morel let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas started the engine and headed towards his next load, his heart filled with hope and the open road stretching before him like a promise. The following weeks settled into a rhythm of long drives, brief stops, and constant communication. Silas and Amber talked on the phone every night, their conversations often stretching for hours. They shared details about their days, their challenges, and their dreams. Silas told Amber about the different places he visited, the people he met, and the strange and wonderful things he saw on the road. Amber, in turn, told Silas about her work at the animal hospital, the animals she cared for, and the satisfaction she found in helping others. They also made plans for their next visit, trying to coordinate their schedules and find a meeting point that was convenient for both of them. It wasn't easy. Silas's work kept him constantly on the move, and Amber's job required her to be in one place, but they were determined to make it work. They cherished their phone calls, their virtual connection, and they looked forward to their in-person reunions, with growing anticipation. Morel, too, seemed to miss Amber. She would often sit by Silas's phone, listening intently to Amber's voice, and she would purr loudly whenever she heard her name. Silas suspected that Morel had formed a special bond with Amber, a connection that went beyond simple affection. It was as if Morel sensed that Amber was important to Silas, that she brought him happiness and companionship. One evening, as Silas was driving through Arkansas, he received a call from Amber. Her voice sounded strained and upset. Silas, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I have some bad news. Silas's heart sank. What is it, Amber? What's wrong? Amber hesitated. My grandmother passed away this morning. Silas was stunned. He knew how close Amber was to her grandmother, how much she loved and cherished her. Oh, Amber, he said, his voice filled with sympathy. I'm so sorry, I didn't even know she was sick. She wasn't, Amber said, her voice choked with tears. It was sudden, a heart attack. Silas felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He wanted to be there for Amber, to hold her and comfort her. But he was hundreds of miles away, driving through the middle of nowhere. Oh, Amber, he said again. I wish I could be there with you. Amber sniffled. Thank you, Silas. That means a lot. The funeral is in a few days. I'm going to have to fly back home. Silas's mind raced. He wanted to attend the funeral, to support Amber during this difficult time. But he had a delivery to make, a schedule to keep. He didn't know if he could get away. "Amber," he said slowly, "where is the funeral?" Amber told him the location, a small town in South Carolina, not too far from where Silas had found Mirelle. Silas's heart skipped a beat. It was possible. It would be tight, but it was possible. "Amber," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I'm going to try to be there. I'm going to try to make it to the funeral." Amber's voice trembled with emotion. "Really, Silas? You would do that for me?" "Of course, Amber," Silas said. "You're important to me. I want to be there for you." He hung up the phone and immediately called Brenda. "Brenda," he said, his voice urgent, "I need to reschedule my delivery." Brenda sighed. "Silas, what is it this time? You know I can't keep doing this." "It's important, Brenda," Silas said. "It's a personal emergency. I need to go to South Carolina. I need to be there for someone." Brenda hesitated, then relented. "All right, Silas," she said. "But this is the last time. You understand? The very last time." "I understand, Brenda," Silas said. "Thank you. Thank you so much." He hung up the phone and felt a surge of determination. He was going to make it to the funeral. He was going to be there for Amber. He was going to drive through the night if he had to. He glanced over at Mirelle, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "Well, girl," he said, his voice filled with purpose, "looks like we have a new destination." Mirelle let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas started the engine and headed east, his heart filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. The drive to South Carolina was grueling. Silas pushed himself and his truck to the limit, driving through the night, stopping only for brief fuel and rest breaks. He was fueled by a combination of grief for Amber's loss and a fierce determination to be there for her. He wanted to offer her comfort, support, and a shoulder to cry on. He wanted to show her that she wasn't alone, that he cared about her deeply. Mirelle, too, seemed to sense the urgency of their journey. She remained quiet and still in her carrier, watching Silas with those large, empathetic eyes. She would occasionally reach out a paw and touch his arm, as if offering silent reassurance. Silas was grateful for her presence, for her unwavering companionship. She was a constant reminder that even in the midst of sadness, there was still room for love and connection. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft glow over the landscape, Silas finally reached the small town where Amber's grandmother's funeral was being held. He found the church where the service was taking place and parked his truck on a quiet side street. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, and climbed out of the cab. He opened the passenger door and carefully lifted out Mirelle's carrier. "All right, girl," he said, his voice soft. "We're here. Let's go support Amber." Mirelle let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas carried the carrier towards the church, his footsteps heavy. He was nervous, unsure of what to expect. He had never been to a funeral before, and he didn't know how to behave. He felt like an outsider, a stranger in a strange land. As he approached the entrance, he saw Amber standing outside, talking to a group of people. She looked pale and tired, her eyes red and swollen. But when she saw Silas, her face lit up with a small smile. "Silas," she said, her voice filled with surprise and gratitude. "You came." "Of course I came, Amber," Silas said, his voice gruff but gentle. "I told you I would." He set Mirelle's carrier down and stepped forward, offering Amber a hug. She clung to him tightly, her body trembling with emotion. Silas held her close, feeling a surge of protectiveness. He wanted to shield her from the pain, to take away her sorrow. But he knew that he couldn't. He could only offer her his presence, his support, and his love. They stood together for a few moments. Then Amber pulled away, wiping her tears. "Thank you for coming, Silas," she said. "It means so much to me." She gestured to the group of people nearby. These are my family and friends. They're all very curious about you. Silas felt a blush rise to his cheeks. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He was a solitary man, a man who preferred the company of his own thoughts. But he forced himself to smile and greet Amber's loved ones. They were all kind and welcoming, offering him condolences and expressing their gratitude for his presence. The funeral service was simple and moving. The church was small and filled with people who loved Amber's grandmother. The pastor spoke about her life, her kindness, and her faith. There were tears and laughter, memories shared and stories told. Silas stood beside Amber, holding her hand, offering her silent support. He felt a deep sense of connection to her, a bond that transcended words. After the service, there was a reception at the church hall. Silas stayed by Amber's side, helping her greet guests and offering her comfort whenever she needed it. He even introduced Myrtle to Amber's family and friends. They were all charmed by the little cat, her gentle demeanor and her playful antics. Myrtle, in turn, seemed to enjoy the attention, purring contentedly as she was petted and admired. As the day drew to a close, Silas felt a sense of exhaustion, both physical and emotional, but he also felt a sense of fulfillment. He had been there for Amber when she needed him, and he had strengthened their bond in the process. He had also connected with her family and friends, and he had gained a deeper understanding of her life and her background. He and Amber found a quiet corner of the church hall and sat down, their hands intertwined. "Thank you for everything, Silas," Amber said, her voice soft. "You've been amazing." "It was my honor, Amber," Silas replied. "I'm just glad I could be here for you." They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Amber spoke again. "Silas," she said, her voice hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." Silas's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Amber?" Amber took a deep breath. I'm not sure if I can continue our relationship." Silas was stunned. "What? What do you mean?" Amber's eyes filled with tears. "This whole experience, it's made me realize some things. About myself, about my life, about what I want." Silas's voice trembled. "And what do you want, Amber?" Amber hesitated. I want a home. I want a family. I want stability. And I don't think I can have those things with you, Silas." Silas felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. But we've been working so hard," he said, his voice pleading. "We've been making it work. We can still make it work." Amber shook her head. "I don't think so, Silas. Your life is on the road. You're always moving, always traveling. And I can't leave my job. I can't leave my home. I need roots, Silas. I need a place to belong." Silas was speechless. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to argue with her. He knew that she was right. His life was on the road. He couldn't offer her the stability and the security that she craved. Tears streamed down his face. So this is it?" he whispered. "This is goodbye." Amber reached out and touched his hand. "I'll always care about you, Silas," she said, her voice filled with sadness. "You'll always have a special place in my heart. But I don't think we can be together, not in the way we want to be." Silas pulled his hand away, his heart aching. He couldn't bear to look at her. He stood up, abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I understand," he said, his voice rough. "I guess I should go." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy. He didn't look back. He didn't say another word. He just left, his heart shattered into a million pieces. He climbed back into his truck, feeling empty and alone. He started the engine, the rumble of the diesel filling the silence. He drove away from the church, away from Amber, away from the hope that he had dared to feel. He didn't know where he was going, But he knew he couldn't stay in South Carolina any longer. He couldn't bear the pain of the goodbye. The drive away from South Carolina was a blur of pain and confusion for Silas. He felt like a part of him had been ripped away, leaving a gaping hole in his chest. He couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong so quickly. He had been so happy with Amber, so hopeful for their future. He had dared to believe that he could have it all, the freedom of the road and the companionship of a loving partner. But now, that dream had been shattered. He was alone again, driving endlessly across the country, with only Mirelle for company. The familiar loneliness that he had tried so hard to escape washed over him, threatening to drown him in its despair. He drove in silence, the radio off, his thoughts consumed by memories of Amber. He remembered her smile, her laughter, her gentle touch. He remembered their conversations, their shared dreams, their moments of intimacy. He replayed their last conversation over and over again in his mind, trying to find a reason, an explanation for her decision. He knew that she was right. He couldn't offer her the stability and the security that she craved. But it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. He felt like he had failed, like he had lost his chance at happiness. Mirelle seemed to sense his distress. She stayed close to him, purring softly, nuzzling against his hand. She was a constant source of comfort, a reminder that he wasn't completely alone. Silas was grateful for her presence, for her unwavering companionship. But even her love couldn't fill the void that Amber had left behind. He drove for days, his destination unclear. He didn't care where he went, as long as it was far away from South Carolina, far away from the memories of Amber. He took on any load that Brenda assigned him, driving long hours, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion. He wanted to escape his pain, to bury himself in his work, but the pain followed him wherever he went, a constant ache in his heart. He stopped at truck stops along the way, eating alone in diners, sleeping alone in his cab. He avoided conversations with other truckers, preferring the solitude of his own company. He felt like an outcast, a man who didn't belong anywhere. One evening, as he was driving through Texas, he received a call from Brenda. "Silas," she said, her voice concerned. "Are you okay? You sound different." Silas hesitated. He didn't want to burden Brenda with his personal problems, but he also needed to talk to someone, to share his pain with another human being. I'm going through a rough time, Brenda," he said, his voice rough. It's personal." Brenda was silent for a moment. "I understand, Silas," she said, "but I'm worried about you. You've been working too hard. You need to take a break." Silas scoffed. "I don't need a break, Brenda. I need to keep moving. I need to keep busy." Brenda's voice was firm. "No, Silas, you need to stop. You need to take some time for yourself. I'm assigning you a load to California, but I want you to take it easy. Take your time. Rest when you need to rest." Silas sighed. He knew that Brenda was right. He couldn't keep running forever. He needed to confront his pain, to deal with his emotions. "All right, Brenda," he said finally. "I'll try." "Good," Brenda said. "And Silas, if you need anything at all, you can call me. You know that, right?" Silas's heart softened. He was grateful for Brenda's concern, for her support. "Thank you, Brenda," he said, his voice sincere. "That means a lot." He hung up the phone and felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to heal. Maybe he could find a way to move on. The drive to California was long and solitary, but Silas used the time to reflect on his life and his choices. He thought about Amber, about their brief but intense connection, about the pain of their parting. He realized that he had been so focused on his loneliness, on his desire for companionship, that he had ignored the reality of his lifestyle. He was a long-haul driver, a man of the road. His life was defined by constant movement, by endless miles, by fleeting encounters. He couldn't offer Amber the stability and the security that she craved. He couldn't give her a home, a family, a normal life. And he had to accept that. He had to accept that some dreams were not meant to be, that some connections were destined to be temporary. He also thought about Mirelle, about the unexpected joy and companionship that she had brought into his life. He realized that she was more than just a pet. She was his friend, his confidant, his family. She had taught him the importance of connection, the power of love, the beauty of simple moments. She had shown him that even in the midst of loneliness, there was still room for joy and purpose. Silas was grateful for Mirelle. He was grateful for her unwavering loyalty, her gentle presence, her unconditional love. He knew that he couldn't have survived the past few weeks without her. As he drove westward, the landscape changed. The flat plains of Texas gave way to the rugged mountains of New Mexico and Arizona. The air grew warmer and drier, filled with the scent of sagebrush and the vastness of the desert. Silas felt a sense of awe and wonder as he gazed at the towering rock formations, the endless stretches of sand, the fiery sunsets that painted the sky in vibrant hues. He realized that there was a beauty and a freedom in the open road, a sense of adventure and possibility that he had taken for granted. He had been so focused on his loneliness, on his longing for connection, that he had forgotten to appreciate the unique aspects of his life. He decided to embrace his journey, to savor the moments, to find joy in the unexpected. He stopped at roadside diners and quirky attractions, talking to the locals, learning about their lives and their stories. He visited national parks and monuments, hiking through canyons, marveling at waterfalls, and gazing at the stars in the clear night sky. He even tried his hand at line dancing in a honky-tonk bar, much to Mirelle's amusement. He discovered that there was a world beyond the highway, a world filled with interesting people, breathtaking landscapes, and unforgettable experiences. He realized that he wasn't as alone as he thought he was. He had Mirelle, he had Brenda, and he had the memories of Amber. And he had the open road, a constant companion that offered both solitude and adventure. As he crossed the California border, Silas felt a sense of anticipation. He'd never spent much time in California, and he was curious to explore what the state had to offer. He drove along the Pacific Coast Highway, marveling at the rugged cliffs, the crashing waves, and the golden beaches. He visited San Francisco, walking across the Golden Gate Bridge, riding a cable car, and exploring the vibrant neighborhoods. He even took Mirelle to a dog park, where she surprised him by befriending a group of friendly dogs. Silas watched her, a smile playing on his lips. He was proud of her ability to adapt, to connect, to find joy in new experiences. He realized that he too had the capacity to adapt, to connect, to find joy. He just had to be willing to open his heart and embrace the possibilities. As Silas continued his journey through California, he found himself drawn to the smaller towns and communities, the places where he could connect with people on a more personal level. He visited a farmer's market in a small coastal town, buying fresh produce and chatting with the local farmers. He attended a community concert in a park, listening to the music and sharing stories with the other attendees. He even volunteered at a local animal shelter, helping to care for the abandoned and neglected animals. He discovered that there was a warmth and a generosity in these communities, a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He realized that he had been so focused on his solitude, on his independence, that he had closed himself off from the possibility of connection. He had built walls around himself, protecting himself from pain and disappointment, but also preventing himself from experiencing joy and love. He decided to tear down those walls, to open his heart to the world around him. He started reaching out to people, sharing his stories, and listening to theirs. He learned about their dreams, their struggles, their hopes, and their fears. He discovered that everyone had a story to tell, and that everyone longed for connection. One evening, as he was driving through a small town in Northern California, he saw a sign for a local art gallery. He had always been interested in art, but he had never had the opportunity to explore it. He decided to stop and check it out. The Fay gallery was small but charming, filled with paintings, sculptures, and photographs by local artists. Silas wandered through the exhibits, admiring the creativity and talent on display. He was particularly drawn to a series of photographs that captured the beauty and the solitude of the open road. The photographs depicted vast landscapes, empty highways, and lonely truck stops. But they also conveyed a sense of freedom, adventure, and possibility. Silas felt a connection to these images, a sense of recognition. They captured the essence of his life, the essence of his journey. As he was admiring the photographs, he struck up a conversation with the gallery owner, a friendly woman named Sarah. Sarah told him about the artists, about their inspiration, and about their connection to the community. She also asked Silas about himself, about his life on the road, and about his companion, Morel. Silas shared his story with Sarah, his voice filled with passion and emotion. He told her about his loneliness, his heartbreak, and his journey of self-discovery. He told her about Morel, about the joy and companionship that she had brought into his life. Sarah listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding and empathy. She told Silas that she too had experienced loneliness and heartbreak. She had moved to the small town to start a new life, to escape the pain of her past. She had found solace in art, in nature, and in the community. She told Silas that she believed that everyone had the capacity to heal, to grow, and to find happiness. She just had to be willing to open their heart and embrace the possibilities. Silas and Sarah talked for hours, sharing their stories, their dreams, and their fears. They discovered that they had a deep connection, a shared understanding of the human experience. They exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. As Silas drove away from the gallery, he felt a sense of hope and inspiration. He had found an unexpected connection, a kindred spirit in a small town in Northern California. He realized that there were connections to be found everywhere, if only he was willing to look for them. Silas's journey through California continued, each day bringing new discoveries and new connections. He visited a redwood forest, marveling at the towering trees that seemed to touch the sky. He hiked along the coast, breathing in the fresh sea air and watching the waves crash against the shore. He even took a surfing lesson, much to his own surprise. He was learning to embrace new experiences, to step outside of his comfort zone, to live in the present moment. He stayed in touch with Sarah, calling her every few days to share his adventures and to listen to hers. They talked about art, about life, about their dreams for the future. Silas found himself drawn to Sarah's warmth, her intelligence, and her open heart. He felt a connection to her that was different from the connection he had felt with Amber. This connection was not based on longing or desperation, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. As his time in California drew to a close, Silas felt a sense of sadness, but also a sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the journey, for the lessons he had learned, for the people he had met. He was grateful for Morel, for her unwavering companionship, for her role in his transformation. He was no longer the same man who had driven into California weeks ago. He had changed. He had grown. He had healed. He started his journey back east, heading towards his next load, his heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. He knew that his life on the road would never be the same. He would still be a trucker, driving long hours, traveling across the country, but he would also be a man with connections, a man with a community, a man with a future. He would no longer be alone. He decided to make a detour on his way back, a detour to South Carolina. He wanted to visit Amber one last time, to say a proper goodbye, to thank her for the role she had played in his journey. He knew that it wouldn't be easy. He knew that it would bring up painful memories, but he also knew that it was necessary. He needed closure. He arrived in South Carolina and found Amber at her apartment. She was surprised to see him, but she greeted him with a warm smile. They talked for a long time, sharing their experiences, their feelings, and their hopes for the future. Silas told Amber about his journey through California, about the people he had met, and about the lessons he had learned. Amber listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding and compassion. She told Silas that she was happy for him, that she was glad he had found healing and connection. She also told him that she had thought about him often, that she would always cherish their time together. They said their goodbyes, their voices filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. They hugged tightly, holding on to each other for a long moment. As Silas drove away from Amber's apartment, he felt a sense of peace. He had said goodbye, he had found closure, and he was ready to move on. He knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, there would be setbacks, there would be moments of loneliness. But he also knew that he was strong, that he was resilient, and that he was capable of finding happiness and connection wherever he went. He glanced over at Mirelle, who was watching him with those curious eyes. "Well, girl," he said, his voice filled with anticipation. "Looks like we have a new horizon." Mirelle let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. Silas started the engine and headed east, his heart filled with hope and the open road stretching before him like a promise. He was ready for whatever the future held, knowing that he was no longer alone and that the journey itself was the destination.